Hello, I would like to show you how to make these isolation gowns out of the pattern from Peekaboo Pattern Shop. You will need to download the pattern and you can have it printed off either with your home computer and put it together like a puzzle, or you can get a larger PDF and take that into a print shop and have that done. So I had it done at a print shop, and there were 2 pages, and you can see that you need to cut these out. So I'll show you how I have that cut out in 1 second. Okay, so I have the pattern pieces cut out and I also have them taped. You can see that there's a little circle here, and in order to put the top to the bottom, both of the front and the backs of the isolation gowns, you will need to tape. Just match up this circle and just tape along the edge there, and that'll give you the full pattern. Okay, so next I'll show you how to lay the pattern down on the fabric. This particular gown that I made using Peekaboo Pattern Shop's isolation gown pattern, I made out of cotton. However, I did find a Ripstop Nylon fabric that's breathable, and it is water repellent and washable. And I got this at Ripstop on a roll online, and I got a big roll of it. So what we have to start with are the pattern pieces that have the cut along the fold, which is the isolation gown front, because that's just one full piece, and then also the sleeve part. And the sleeve part will also be cut on a fold. And what that means is I folded the fabric, and so I will be cutting along this edge. I will not cut this edge. I will leave this so that it opens up and we have a full sleeve. Same with this. Cutting it so that it's on the fold of the fabric. I'm sorry, it's kind of dark in this room right here. And then once we cut around this pattern piece, it'll open up and we'll have a full piece. We don't have to do that for the 2 on the back because these are 2 individual pieces. And that looks like this. So the back of the gown actually wraps around and ties for better full coverage. First cut out 1 sleeve. I do have to have 2 in total, but I'm going to cut 1 sleeve on that fold, and I'm going to cut 1 front section on that fold, and then I'll be back. Okay, so I have the front of the gown cut out as I showed you, and 1 sleeve, and now it's time to cut out the 2 back panels. And in order to use up as much of the fabric as possible with as little waste as possible, I went ahead and I'm scooting it over, turn the pattern upside down so that I can utilize some of the areas here. And then I did a quick flip over and added a little extra, so that way I knew how much I needed for the other half. And in order to save time, I'm actually going to fold the fabric so that I can cut them at the same time, and also the fabric will fold and I'll use that folded edge for the other sleeve. So I'm going to do that now. Okay, so now that I have the pattern itself cut out, minus the cuffs, we'll do that with a different fabric. So here is the sleeve. And because we're working here, I'm showing you with Ripstop, there isn't a grain line that's, directional. The Ripstop doesn't tear and rip. It's really nice. It doesn't have stretch. unless you're at the biased. So you can have your pattern flip this way, or you could have it flip this way, however it works best for you. So in order to see the two back pieces, as you notice, I did cut off the fold because we need two separate pieces. So these are our two back pieces, and they have these little notches on the sides, and these notches are where we will end up putting our ties, so it'll tie the back. And then we have our front piece. And so we're going to get started with sewing this now. Okay, so the next step in the instructions for the pattern say to put the shoulder seams together, but after having made a few of these, I found some little shortcuts that help me out. Now, one thing to notice, and I don't know if you can really see it or not, is that the ripstop has one side that's a little shinier than the other side. And so I try to keep that really shinier side. It's hard to see on the outside. So this would be the right side of the fabric. And this is the back of the gown. So the right shoulder. And then I have to turn it over for the shiny side. And this is going to be my left shoulder. So again, I like to add Velcro at this point in time due to the fact that it's easier for me to get the Velcro put on now than at the end of the gown when I'm trying to shove the whole gown into the sewing machine. And this doesn't get in the way of the neckline or anything like that, so this is how I prefer to do it. But you're welcome to wait until the end if you want to put your Velcro in. So I like to put on the right shoulder, the right back of the gown, the soft Velcro. So I cut this little Velcro placement out and I just trace over it with a marker. And this is going to be a 4-inch piece of Velcro. And then this one is going to actually Velcro from the wrong side on top of here. So I will turn this over to put my Velcro placement on the wrong side of the fabric. And this is going to be the scratchy side of the Velcro. And if you do it wrong, it doesn't matter. It's just kind of how I prefer to do it. So we're going to go sew the Velcro on next. Okay, so I already cut around my 4-inch. It's a little bit over, but it's fine. 4 inches of the Velcro. And I'm going to attach these to the back of the gown. Remember, I put this is the left shoulder of the gown. It's the armhole goes to the left. And I wanted that Velcro to overlap on top. And I said this was going to be my scratchy side. So I have my little pattern right there. I'm going to line it up, take a pin, go right in the center here. Now the thing with the ripstop is that you don't want to make a whole bunch of pinholes throughout your ripstop. So I try to stay within the parameters of where I'm sewing. So there's a poke here and a poke here. However, as I sew this on, that will be sealed by the Velcro that's going to be secured down here. So I'm going to be using a number 7010 needle, and I have 100% polyester thread. And that's what's recommended. This is actually a 70, this is the Mara 70 100% polyester Gutermann thread. This is my favorite thread, but whatever polyester thread you have will work. But a number 10 needle is a good size for this type of fabric. So we're going to go ahead and pop this side on first. Straight stitch, go in, back up. Don't forget to remove your needle while you're pinned. So there you have the side that's actually going to come over and attach to the other half of the back, the right side of the back. So now we're going to do the same thing with the soft Velcro on the right shoulder. Okay, so as you can see, we have the Velcro on the left and the Velcro on the right so that they'll close together nicely, give adjustability depending on the size. Also, I do make a recommended size is large. One size fits most, so this pattern is a size large. So now what we're going to do is we're going to go get our front seam, our front panel, and we're going to sew the back seams to the front seam. So that's what's happening next. Okay, so I grabbed the front panel and we want to put the right sides of the fabric together at the shoulder seams and stitch those shoulder seams. So I'm going to line it up. Now I typically don't use a pen because I just get in here and start sewing. Another thing I'm going to do that's going to save me time is instead of using the sewing machine, I'm actually going to use my serger. The serger will not only put these seams together, but it will finish it off so that we're not sewing and then going back to finish the seams. However, if you don't have a serger, then you go ahead and sew this with a straight stitch, and then on the raw edges, you'll have to go back in and use a zigzag stitch to finish these edges because they will fray. Now go ahead and repeat the same thing with the shoulder seams on the left-hand side. Now you can see that we have those shoulder seams in, we have our left back and our right back. At this point now we're going to be adding our bias tape around the neckline. There is a cheater way to do this if you're in a hurry, and I will show you an example of both ways, the typical way to add the bias as well as my little cheater way. Okay, so the pattern calls for a 1/2 inch of double fold bias tape, and I ordered just a whole bulk amount of this. I believe it was on Amazon. Came in 55 yards. So the double fold, it's folded twice. It's double folded. And when it's sandwiched like this in half, then this is 1/2 inch. The traditional way of adding bias is to open it up and to line up one edge to the selvage edge of your fabric and then sew along in that indentation. And then once you sew that and it's down, then you flip the whole thing over, come around, and then you repeat sewing here along this edge such that it catches both sides. In order to do it more quickly, I'm actually going to just do the cheater method, and I'm just going to sandwich the two in here. Now again, you can pin these if you want to. I just find that I can just move along fairly quickly. I can even see that little bit of blue there, so I know that I've caught this ripstop all the way up in here. Okay, so I am ready to do a straight stitch onto attaching the bias to the ripstop here. And as I mentioned before, by adding your Velcro beforehand, it's not going to hurt. It's not going to get in the way because you have plenty of room to finish up your seam and to add your bias. Okay, so now that you have the neckline completed with the bias, then it's time to start adding the sleeves. And what I have found, the easiest way to find the middle of your sleeve is to fold it in half on itself, lining it up, lining those raw edges up. And then I just do a finger press right here in the upper portion of the sleeve, because then when I open it, I will have a little indentation right here. And that indentation is where I'm going to line up the sleeve to the seam And it looks a little upside down because you're basically fitting this curve the opposite way of what you would think it would be doing. So there will be a little bit of easing into the seams. I do use pins, and for this I try to pin just right up along the edge so that I'm not creating any more holes than necessary. So I've pinned it where that middle section is, and then I want to find the bottom lining up to the bottom edge of the sleeve, and I also want to pin here. I would say probably the trickiest part of the isolation gown pattern is the sleeve, and it's not that hard. You just have to kind of ease this fabric and make little tiny gatherings so that you don't end up with just one big bunch and have it be kind of wonky in one section. You're just going to kind of ease the fabric as you go around sewing this. Ripstop, as I mentioned, doesn't have much of any stretch, so you will need to add a little bit of a gather or pucker as you go. And the whole point is just to kind of ease it in there such that it doesn't have just one big chunk. So now I'm going on the other side where I've lined up the two side seams here, and I'm pinning that. And again, I am going to use a serger so that I can both sew the sleeve in and finish off the edges at the same time. So that's what's happening next. Okay, so again, just to repeat that sleeve process, I'm doing the opposite sleeve. I lined up my center by folding the sleeve in half and then just folding the fabric to make an indentation, and I pinned the fold to the seam, and then I'll find the two edges and line those up for our side seams. And I will also pin here along that edge and do the same thing for the other side seam. Find the two edge pieces, right sides together, and pin them. And we'll do the same thing with easing and gently gathering fabric as we go around the armhole here to add the sleeve. Okay, so the next step to this is we're going to be putting the side seams together, and we also have to create the ties. And I'm going to use actually the same bias that I used for the neckline to create the ties, and I'll show you how to do that next. Okay, so to create the ties, the pattern wants two 18-inch ties on each side. So I'm going to take my bias tape and just measure out an 18-inch. And then just follow that same one and measure my second one. And these will be your ties. You'll have one on the inside, which I'll show you how to do, and then one that comes around on the outside. So now I just want to make sure that we close the opening here. So I'm just going to run let's finish off one end. So we'll run a straight stitch along one side, and then along the open edge to close it up. Can leave this one unfinished because this is the one that's going to get sewn into the side seam. You can use matching thread if you want. As mentioned, just for the tutorial purposes, I am going to not be switching out threads. So repeat with your other thread or your other bias tape. Okay, so now to make sure that you get your ties going in the right direction, I like to lay my gown down, and I like to have it where it's the right sides out. We haven't sewn the side seams together yet, but you can see Here's our neckline. Here's the back of our gown. Here's going to be our left sleeve, and here's our right sleeve. So this gown is going to have a tie coming from this side and gathering the tie from this side. So we want to sew our tie on the inside of the right sides together of this right side of the fabric. So I'm going to flip my gown around, let me get my pin in there, and focus on this side here. Get my sleeve out here. So I'm on the right side of the gown with right sides together. Lay it down. Now remember those tabs that we cut? That's where we're going to lay our bias tab. So get your unfinished part of the bias and just pop it right up to the tab. And you're lining up your side seams here. And I'm actually going to pin those side seams. And then we'll keep the tie on the inside of your gown. And that will line up here. And we're going to go ahead and just take our pins and run them just along the edges here. So I'll put a pin here and probably one here, and then up around the sleeve as well. And we're going to do that on this side, the right side, and I'm going to serge this whole seam here, and then we'll finish the other side of the gown next. Now it's time to sew up the right side of the isolation gown, and I am putting together the sleeve edges. Now I'm going to show you my cheater method here. Normally you would go ahead and just sew the whole entire sleeve and the side seam with the tie that's inside of here. But then you have to add the stretch cuff. And I've kind of figured out that if I add the stretch cuff first and then finish the side seam, it saves me a whole step. So we're going to cheat a little bit. Now, if you want to follow the pattern, this is when you just go ahead and finish off the seams, the side seams. But I'm going to show you a bit of a cheater way to get done a little more quickly. Okay, so remember when we cut out our pattern and I said we're going to use the pattern piece for the cuffs with a different type of fabric? Well, it calls for a stretch knit, and you want to have a stretch knit that has good recovery so that when you stretch it, it comes back nicely, and you want at least 50% stretch. So I was able to order fabric. Again, I think I got this on Amazon, and it was like $20 for maybe, I think it was 15 yards of this stretch fabric. Now, you will be putting it on the fold because you're making a cuff, and you also want your stretch to be running the direction that it shows on the pattern. So first of all, find your stretch. This is nice and stretchy. This is less stretchy, okay? So I want to make sure that my stretchy is running this direction where it says stretchy. Right? So like this, stretchy, okay? And since I know that I have to cut on an edge here, I'll fold this in order to create the cuff. Okay, so what I'm gonna do is, I've got my stretch going this way, I'm going to cut out one cuff and then the second cuff, and I'll be right back. Okay, so if you were to follow the directions of the pattern, you would have cut your cuff sleeves out, having two, and then the directions tell you to go ahead and sew up the long sides of the cuff, and then to turn them once you have that long side of the cuff sewn, like this, then you turn it in on itself with wrong sides together. And then you're going to need to add this cuff to the finished or the closed up seam on your gown. And you can do that with right sides together, but to me it was a little bit tricky and I wanted something faster. So I experimented a little bit and I came up with how to put it together when these are still raw edges. So I have the wrong side of the sleeve, but I want to work with right sides. And so I'll open up the right side of my sleeve. Now, instead of working with it, the cuff going like this, I'm opening the cuff. This is the stretchy part, really stretchy. And I want to make sure that the wrong sides of my cuff are together and the right sides are sticking up. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to attach the cuff to the open sleeve. And then once I have that, and I'll be doing a little bit of stretching to make that happen, and then this whole thing will kind of scrunch a little bit like this. But it's easier for me then to take the right sides together with my cuff and then finish sewing up the whole gown on the side seams. So again, we're going to use the right side. So here's the wrong side of the fabric. So I got to turn it in, because remember I had pinned that shoulder seam, or the under the arm seam. I had pinned it, and I had also pinned the tie. So instead of unpinning those, I'm just going to the right side of the cuff, the bottom of the sleeve actually. And now I will pin a little bit here just to get it started. And I'm also going to use my serger so that will finish off the edge as I go. And I'm going to be stretching my top fabric, not my bottom, as I sew in order to create the gathering that this will need. So to me that was quicker and easier than when I was trying to add a cuff after it was sewn together, because now all we'll do is put the right sides together and we'll end up sewing all the way along the sleeve and the side of the garment. So we'll go ahead and do that next. Okay, so now we have both of the sleeves and the side seams sewn. And now it's time to finish off the edges of our fabric. And you can see how this is like, it wants to fray. So if you do not have a serger, you're going to need to use a zigzag stitch to finish off the edge. Then we're going to be folding it under, and we're going to go ahead and sew with a straight stitch so that way it has a nice finished edge. So since I have a serger, we're just going to go ahead and quickly whip these edges to be, I guess, serged, finished. There we go. Okay, your gown is getting near completion, and at this point in time we need to add the other tie. So you can see on the right side of the gown, this tie is part of the seam, and then we need the tie from here added so that once we fold the seam down, the tie will come and we'll be able to put them together. So when you're finishing the seams, you may have noticed that I cut off my notch. And I could have stopped before I cut my little notch off, and I could have marked it somehow, but I didn't. So what I do is I just lay my gown out, and I make sure I have the Velcro together and the top together, lay it as flat as I can get it. I know if you're working with a small space like myself, it's a little bit challenging. And then just slide your gown up gently till you get to where the other side of this tie is. And then I like to just fold my tie back over straight. And that just gives me a good idea where I need to place the tie for the outside. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to create it such, actually this direction. I'm going to sew it down here, and then I'm going to turn this over when I do my finished seam, and I'm going to open it up, and then I'll sew that, just give it a few extra stitches so it's nice and snug. So I've marked that little area here. I'm going to take my sewing machine and just sew a couple of stitches here to get it in there. I could have added it also. Another step that could have been a little bit faster is I could have added this as I was sewing the basic seam. That would have been a smart step. I did forget to do that this time, so let's go ahead and just add it now. All right, so the final step in making the gown is, of course, to finish the seams. So we are going to be turning the finished edge, whether it's a zigzag or your serged edge, roll it down under to the wrong side of the fabric and go ahead and stitch along the edge from the top. And that's going to just allow this to have a nice, clean, finished edge. Okay, so I turned under all of the seams and sewed them down, and now I'm just going to do a little bit more reinforcement to the tie that we added at the end. And there you have it. The isolation gown made with Ripstop Nylon, bias tape for the neckline, and stretch fabric for the cuffs. This is a size large. It is one size fits most. It does have the wraparound, so let me show you that. Ties in the back. Great coverage, breathable, wash in hot water, medium dryer, water repellent, lots of great things with the gown. So thank you, and I hope you want to sew these too.